Okay, so I guess briefly I want to kind of touch on, let's talk about the last 35 years. So different types of technology that have existed in the market, right? So we've got cryosaunas, so using nitrogen and different mediums in which to bring that into basically a cylinder where your head's sticking out. And there's always a factor of wind chill, typically a single motor fan, and like a black box where you're mixing that air and liquid nitrogen into that box and it's sort of turning itself back into a gas and obviously going back to atmosphere, but specifically concentrated through the cylinder. Then you have hybrids, not to be confused with the car, which was always confusing when we were talking about it, trying to explain it to people. But hybrids,
Oh,
obviously,
really? When you use the word hybrid, it would kind
it
of
would
confuse
just go,
people.
they'd take people off on a tangent, and then they would be like,
Are you talking about nitrogen to air exchangers?
"Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly." So, like taking an enclosed unit, but not directly exposing the individual to that gas, because obviously, if you did in an enclosed unit, it would be a gas chamber, and that's a whole separate thing. Not good. So yeah, but the challenges with that obviously is there's a pre-cool time and duration and expense with
Mhm.
nitrogen, and then you've got electric now. So electric, obviously, electric chambers, especially in the past couple of years, maybe a little bit longer, maybe the last few years, starting to trend um, in the direction of replacing out these older technologies. And that's just to be clear, like to everyone who's listening or listens to this, I am not saying that they're inferior technologies at all. They served a place and a time in this market. That's part of the evolution of this market, and every market evolves for different reasons. And the last few years, electric cryotherapy has evolved for a few reasons. One, like price points have come down dramatically. They've become more reliable. Not all of them, but some systems have become more reliable. You've got you've got power requirements that have come down in terms of building requirements. You also have like market dynamics, right? Like gas companies are no longer willing to deliver nitrogen to cryotherapy centers. The cost of which has also become prohibitive. You're looking like anywhere from 20 to 60% increase over the last since the beginning of the pandemic to date in terms of the cost of nitrogen. Like that's significant. I talked to just on a side note, like tangent, it was an industrial client, had nothing to do with cryotherapy, and they order probably like 500 grams worth of liquid nitrogen a year, and their supplier had increased. Their contract was capped at 8%, and their supplier increased their cost of liquid nitrogen by 22% and basically said, take it or leave it. You don't have an alternative.
Right.
Which is so insane, right? Like from a market dynamic standpoint. So, anyways, I'm gonna go off and I can talk about liquid nitrogen forever. I'm not gonna.
Well, I
Um,
mean, I guess from a thermodynamic standpoint, the kind of way we look at these systems, uh, we call them open systems or closed systems.
right.
However you want to configure that is really up to you. In an open system, you all the energy you've put into formulating this really, really cold fluid, whether it be nitrogen or whatever, is then exhausted. Right? It ends up going to atmosphere. It's wasted. You can't get it back. Whereas a closed system, in some ways, these hybrid systems are kind of closed. They're more or less open, especially from the cooling standpoint, but they are closed from the air recirculation standpoint. Um, there's some efficiencies there, there's some safety things there, but really, I don't think anything really beats these closed system units. And that's interesting because when you look at the expansion temperatures of nitrogen, which is really when we start to get into these funny conversations about temperature, as you're aware, when you look at the expansion temperatures of nitrogen, which is sub 200 degrees. I don't know if anybody's ever put sub 200 degrees on their skin or
I mean,
gone to a
100% be burnt. Like
Yeah,
so.
well, yeah. When you go to a dermatologist, what do they use? They use liquid nitrogen to burn your,
Yep.
whatever. Uh, you're not experiencing negative 200 degrees in a nitrogen system. I guarantee you are not. And we've done tests, independent tests on nitrogen systems in the field. Typically, once they become homogenized and you pre-cooled them and flowed, you're around negative 60, negative 65 degrees Fahrenheit, which is
Right.
suitable. Cryo electric systems, what do? They hover down below truly in ultra temperature ones, below negative 100. So there's a misconception that nitrogen systems are in fact colder than electric systems when you talk about true circulation and bombarding that cold air again and again and again. You will develop a much colder chamber in an electric unit than you will ever achieve. Well, I should say ever. I mean, I suppose you can go super dangerous in a nitrogen system, but typically you won't. Yeah, so I think it's more effective.
But- And like, I'm gonna go be like, you're biased, obviously, because you make electric chambers, which
Sure.
as do I. But like, so to be devil's advocate for a second, because again, perception versus reality. When you talk to people I spoke to someone recently, and they were like, "Well, electric doesn't get cold enough," and I kept kind of trying to get to the point where I was like, "Have you tried an electric chamber?" And then the conclusion was, "No, I haven't." Okay, all right, well then you don't get a say in it. Um, but the other educational or like uplift piece where I had to kind of take a step back over the last couple of years and like really look at things more objectively was like, what are we actually measuring? Like ultimately, what is from a customer standpoint? Yeah, of course, everyone's obsessed with still in a lot of variety of ways the temperature inside the cabin, but whether it's a cryosauna or hybrid or electric, everyone's always trying to verify what the skin temp is, right?
Right.
And what the
Right.
skin temp drop is before and after.
Right.
And frankly, is one of the few objective measures, at least some.
Well, and no, I mean it is, but it's also where are you analyzing that temperature? I mean, if you look at you can't look at the human body's temperature profile, the topology, if you will, the heat profile as homogeneous in any kind of way. I mean, you look at people that have Raynaud's syndrome or have low circulation in their extremities. Their temperature in their hands, their feet are going to be maybe even 15 to 20 degrees colder than normal than what you would assume the human body temperature is. Same thing with the forehead, same thing with the neck. Typically, what we do in our studios is you're measuring 6 inches from the core, right around the shoulder area. What you're going to find is you're typically around 97 degrees once you go in, 96. And then when you come out, you're going to be below, 60, ideally, because you wanted about a 30 degree skin temperature drop. But if you're analyzing on your feet, you're analyzing on your arms, you're not getting at all what you would consider to be you're misconstruing, right?
And that's definitely a
It's dirty. It's dirty data.
It's dirty data, and so that's definitely a disconnect with the market as well, because you see it from these videos and you see it from these posts. It's just everyone measures inconsistently. There is no standardization or best practice, or there is a best practice, but it's not implemented across the market. So maybe that's something we at some point should probably put something out on, because that would be an interesting piece as a side.
Yeah, no, it is. It is. I mean, that's not saying that you shouldn't analyze these extremities. And in fact, when somebody first does a session, the first timer, you actually need to be much more discerning of the extremity temperatures. You need to gauge their response. You need to gauge their pain threshold, because they could very well have poor circulation, not be aware of it, right? As typical as a contraindication. And you should analyze these extremities. So typically, like what we do is, we always say your first session be 3 minutes. Because what we want to do is we want you to come out, we want to analyze everything and be like, okay, well, it looks like, your chest temperature was this, but your legs and this were this. You can go an extra 30, 45 seconds next time, maybe about a minute, or maybe you should bring it down. Why we use 3 minutes as our gauge, I think is a funny story, because I think, so 3 minutes, as we talk about cryosaunas, it's an artifact. Our company's been running cryo studios since 2015, and I've done a bunch of different machines, including saunas and electrics, right? And that 3 minutes seems to be pretty tuned to the amount of refrigerant necessary or nitrogen necessary to, for a singular session. It's not necessarily it has not necessarily have any relevance to how long it takes to drop for 30 to 30, 30 degrees in your skin temperature. And I
Hmm.
think it's interesting to note that people say, oh, you got to do it in 3 minutes, 3 minutes, 3 minutes. No, the reality is I don't want to spend more than 3 minutes worth of nitrogen for your cryotherapy session. Period. I don't want to. I don't
Right.
want to spend 4 minutes, 5 minutes. That's a capital cost.
Right.
Whereas electric, that doesn't exist. At least in
So
some
in
contexts.
other words, put a different way, I guess there's more customization per the individual for a cryotherapy session and an electric,
Yeah.
I
Oh,
mean,
absolutely. Yeah.
Artica system versus
Well, I mean, any electric, truly. I mean, the reality is like, there's a safety margin. You don't want to be going too long, especially because there seems to be contradictory benefits as soon as you go, past 5, 6 minutes. It's not necessarily any better. Doesn't mean that any longer is any better.
so,
Um, but
as a
with
past that point, you're increasing the risk return profile is no longer worth the right.
Yeah, I mean, I've gone as an example to kind of more or less push myself and set the standard because I didn't want anybody to beat me, which is dumb. But I went 9 minutes at 110 degrees. Don't ever do that. Don't ever go below six
I,
minutes. Don't ever go. Yeah, that was a territory where especially after the 6 minute, and I was kind of tracking my response to things. After 6 minutes, you have diminishing returns, I guess is what it boils down to. So don't push it. But that being said, within 3 to 6 minutes, there's a huge profile. There's a huge profile, and we have data on our systems that come back and show every flavor of that profile. We can see everybody's durations. We can see everybody's temperatures because they're changing the wind speed, so we're calculating out like the effective temperatures, and all over the place. Some people like a step function where they blast themselves in the beginning and then they taper it down to like 20%, and then they ride it out for 4 or 5 minutes. There are some people that want it blasted for 2.5 minutes and they're out. There are some people that want it low and slow for 3.5 minutes. I mean, the reality is like physiology is so different, and people's choices should be, kind of number one.
that's I didn't. That's funny. I didn't even think about it. So wait, so you're saying there's data, individual
Oh
data
yeah,
on sessions in terms of what
yeah,
people.
yeah, yeah. We can see how long people go on average. We can see how long people are, at what temperature they're going. And typically we'll be able to see like below certain temperature thresholds what people decide to do with the wind speed, right? It's like
Right.
typically below 70 degrees, in an ethos or 60 degrees ethos, you're starting to touch that wind speed control. You want a little bit of wind. But when you're up at the negative 90, negative 110, wind is rarely touched. Rarely. Which again kind of leads us into this belief that's like, why in the world would you want to go ever colder? If you've reached this threshold where air speed, in fact, in our ethos unit, we have multiple types of fans, but we have cooling fans inside of our evaporators. Right? All electric machines have evaporators, and all of them have wind blowing over a coil. Well, it turns out that wind ended up being too fast just to cool the system. So we use our sensors and our ability to change the evaporator fan speed as well to as soon as somebody gets in, the fan speeds drop to about 20%. So it's whisper quiet and there's barely any wind speed flowing. And time again, in fact, I remember us having a unit that was like, had a little bit of a finicky, a moment where the fan wasn't really like slowing down. People noticed. They're like, hey, is there any way to slow down that fan again? Because I really liked when I got in and it was like really cold and quiet. I'm like, yeah, we'll see what happened. And then we were able to address it. But yeah, people at those really low temperatures, negative 100 degrees, people want it really silent, really cold, but not no air movement. It's only when you start to get into that warmer territory that we want to start to modulate. So yeah, we have data to show that. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's very cool. I don't think anyone has data to show that. But okay. I haven't heard that at least. So, um, if you were to, what would you say is like the most common? Like, I obviously there's a range, right? Like in terms of duration and sort of wind chill, like what's the median? Like, what's the on that
So
curve?
what is the ideal
Yeah.
like scenario?
Or what's the most common that you've seen? Like what within that range? Is it 3 to 4 minutes? Um,
Typically, I think in our ethos units, people struggle to make it 4 minutes.
yeah, I mean, because it's bloody cold.
It's very cold, and it's able to maintain and recover temperatures basically while people are in it. So what we'll see is that they'll go about 3 minutes, 3.5 minutes. But the cool thing too about the ethos, the reason why we do this dual room configuration, we've got actually multiple reasons why we do it. We're still the only like manufacturer who sticks with it, I think. And the reality is it's tough, right? It's a big assembly. Shipping and manufacturing is tough, but um, apart from thermodynamic like efficiency standpoint, right, where you're talking about, whenever you open the front door to the unit, you're not introducing a lot of warm air into the cryo chamber side, which is kind of primarily the reason. The cooler reason to me is that you can hop between chambers and thermoregulate. You can actually get out of the cold without getting out of the cold. But actually, as it becomes too extreme, right? Especially if you're doing contrast therapy, where you might have like water moisture on your skin post sauna or something like that. Now you can change tremendously the heat profile without putting more energy in the system, opening, closing the front door. You can't do that with a single chamber system. You just can't.
Well, and at least
Um,
they could pre-stage it as well. So obviously,
you can
they
pre-stage it too.
towel dry off as much as possible, and then they get in
Yep, absolutely. And in fact, we have a lot of
pre-stage.
people that come that go straight from our saunas directly into the pre-chamber just by itself.
Mhm.
Pre-chamber is typically hovering around negative 20 degrees at steady state, which is you just bellow steam and you cool off in 3 4 minutes post sauna. You come out, you're not sweating, you're putting clothes on, you walk out. It's really nice. So contrast therapy, I think, is key for the dual chamber ultra low temperatures. But the vortex is again a great in between. The only caveat I think to the vortex or the ESOS is that you are gonna find those people that just don't want to win. It's gonna happen. So if you really want to meet the broadest spectrum of users, right, you have to kind of go into the ultra low regime, you know. But you have to be extremely careful to control that temperature.
Look,
And
it's but for me, it was a funny piece of feedback. It was quite a few people actually, kind of like prior to our merging. Where I asked people feedback, I was like, particularly about the vortex, and I, not a single person said it wasn't cold enough, right? Like
yeah, no, we never hear that.
that's the thing that I find.
No, and in fact, I had a gentleman who tried one of our units, and he's done Wim Hof training. If anybody cares
Right.
for Wim
Yeah.
Hof, and he's been at cryo centers all over the place. And he went. I honestly didn't want to let him go, but he knew what he was doing, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna stand here with you. He went 10 minutes
That's
in
crazy.
the vortex at 100% speed. That's how good this guy was. I have never seen anybody go more than 2 minutes at
Yeah.
100% speed. This guy was
100% is
nuts.
a lot.
And he said he was running circles around this conference afterwards. He was so energized. He's like, I've never, ever, ever, ever been that cold. Not ever in my life. Never. And I was like, there you go.
Yeah,
Not the babes.
Wim Hof is definitely dude, he's an interesting cat.
He is. I'm blown away by his
He
ability
did
to
I was at a
control his physiology.
on a side note tangent, I was at a conference once and there was like good 5,000 people, right?
Uh,
He had all of us breathing in unison. And the whole point, it was a prep to being able to hold your breath. And he's like, how many of you think that you can't hold your breath for more than 60 seconds? And obviously, everyone was like, no, we that's not happening. just through these like exercises
Yeah,
beforehand.
oxygenating yourself. Yeah,
Yeah, it was
yeah.
insane. It was really amazing, and it was
What's your record?
I barely made it over. I was like a minute 30, and then I was like, I'm done. Like I'm good.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, I wasn't
I've done
in
close
my
to
life
three
at that point.
minutes. Done close to 3 minutes.
That's
Oh,
yeah. I have to say it's like breathing, and that's another thing. Like breathing, that's another thing we should have probably introduced is like breathing and breath work, and the correct breath work inside a
yeah,
cryo.
Amber is probably going to be the best one to come on and talk about that because she has a beautiful way of calming people through, a session. Um, it's a really important thing for any practitioner to understand how to do. It's not just an important thing from a user standpoint, but it's an important thing from a practitioner standpoint to be able to guide breath work. Because there is there's a relationship kind of being formed in those moments that is hard to beat. You're walking them through a very difficult ordeal, and that's a bonding experience that you definitely want with clientele. So learn it and train your staff on it, and you will not be um, unhappy.
Not like you're in love with her or anything.
Ooh, my wife.
You need a moment
Yeah.
there? You good? You went on a whole journey there.
She's
Oh
pregnant, dude. That's even more love going on for him.
yeah. Oh, that was amazing. Okay. All right. So I think
Okay, so that I guess we talked about, yeah,
yeah, I mean
progression of
I,
technology. I mean,
yeah. And I think what do you think we should talk about next?
you could fit a lot into these conversations. You could snip and cut, you know, and just do like preferential ones, but